Hi and welcome to another self-teach module in your leadership program. This video forms part of a suite of videos and support around developing your leadership skills within the Student Leadership Academy. In this module, what I want to do is focus on your adaptability to change and leading during uncertainty. This is a key part of the role, and as we all know, the world is so very fast changing and so unpredictable in so many ways, and actually leading yourself and your team through that can be a real challenge. There are some practical things though that we can really do that can really help. It's about where we direct our energy and focus as a leader and how we apportion it in certain respects. I'll expand on that, and some of the tools and ideas in terms of how we create a sense of psychological safety as we go forward. So hopefully you'll enjoy this, and hopefully as you go through you'll find the exercises will support your development and embedding of this. So again, what to expect from the course. If you've watched any of these, you'll be familiar with this, but what we're going to provide you with some models, tools and tips, then some reflective questions to help you kind of process and embed, because what I want to encourage you to do is not just absorb, because what you'll do is absorb and then it will disappear out, because research shows that we lose the vast majority of information we're given in learning and presentations unless we start to reflect, apply, contextualize, think about and apply in real life. So the reflective questions are there to help you do that during the session, and I've got what I call the 60-second thought captures or 60-second exercise. You can at any time, because these are timed for 60 seconds so you don't have to stop the video, but if you feel like you need longer, pause the video and take longer, that's fine. You may want to refer to the workbook with particular exercises to support you to go through, or use the workbook afterwards. Either way it's fine, do what works for you, but I encourage you to engage with the material as best you can. Post-session resources and exercises are really useful, as I've said, and what I want to do is think about how to use this. Block out the time to help you allow undistracted, focused attention on the material and your exercises. If you are distracted about, then pause it, do what you need to do, come back, but give yourself some quality time to engage with the material. Download that PDF workbook and complete the exercises. As I've explained before, it's important to do that to embed things. Feel free to pause, rewind, go back anytime, revisit at any time. You've got the luxury of doing that. So if you find yourself in a situation where this might apply and you can't quite remember, or you just want to refresh, you can come back and have a look at it. And as I said, complete the post-session activities. We do or are planning to have some drop-in Q&A sessions. Now, at time of recording, those aren't diaried in, but keep an eye out for those, because there will be an opportunity for you to drop in on some virtual, as in online, or in-person sessions where you can dig a bit deeper with the facilitator about particular topics or experiences or questions that you might have. So we are going to cover, in this module, we're going to look at taking stock of the changes that we're facing. This is an interesting exercise, I think, because what it does is helps put in the context of you and your role in the context of the big picture that change is happening all the time. So we'll explore that as a little exercise for you. We need to understand how change affects us. Now, that we're all different and it affects us in different ways, but if we can kind of have an idea of a model, it helps us just understand that change is a phenomenon that affects us differently. We need to understand your role as a leader and how that impacts upon that, and how you can, more importantly, influence it in positive ways. And how do we create a psychologically safe environment? What does that mean? So we'll get on to that. We're going to look at how do we support others through change. A lot of what we would talk about before will be heading towards that, is ultimately how do we support people through the uncertainty and the change in times. And hopefully you will come away with some identified takeaway actions, some things to focus on for your development, or things to implement, and/or things to implement in your team. Okay, so I want to talk about the three key drivers for change. Now, these are really broad general headings, but these are the things that tend to drive the changes that we experience in the world. So firstly is opportunity. As generally in the world, human beings, we are looking for gaps in the market. There is new technology and there is competitive advantage. In terms of businesses are looking to get that edge that leads to such and such, and that generates change and can influence that. Threat. So, anything in terms of business as well. There's loss of a key customer, perhaps a product or service is obsolete, and particularly, and if we contextualize these in the role and the club or association or roles that you are playing, there will be potentially a service or a cause that you are supporting or offering, and no doubt things will shift and change where you might find there's opportunities to expand, improve, or take advantage of and also things that might threaten that, whether it's quality problem in it, it might be losing a member of staff or your team, or it might be funding issues, that kind of thing. And then there's regulation, and this is something that I guess affects all aspects of life in general, but business, organisation, university life, club. There's lots of different changes, whether it's from health and safety through to regulations around, well, whatever might affect your particular business. You will know that more than me. And when I say business, I mean your club or your association. So those are the key big headlines, if you like, that can drive it. But guess what I want you to do is take some time, and this is where, rather than giving you 60 seconds, I want you to pause and use the activity in the workbook. But I will explain it now. I want you to look at it, the changes that you're facing from 5 different levels. Firstly, the global level. And this is kind of, just from your own awareness, what are some of the global issues that are affecting and driving change? What are some of the global changes that are happening? And you could be talking political, technological, environmental, but just jot down a few, capture those. So we're looking at it from the big picture. Then the national, so we're bringing it into the country and the national kind of picture. What are some of the changes, the things that are going on? It could be political, technological, that kind of thing. What are some of those? And then we're starting to narrow in on the university environment as a whole. The university environment as a whole, your club association, that kind of thing. So what are some of the key changes that are affecting that? And then look at your team. What are some of the impacting changes there? What are some of the things that are affecting you in terms of change within the team? And then, as you can probably guess, we're narrowing in on you and your role as a leader. You may well find that some of the things that are at the global level, university level, are feeding down. So it's okay to duplicate in some sense. But you and your role, what are the changes that are impacting on that? Now, the reason we're doing this, if you take a few minutes to do this, is just to get some ideas, really, I guess, to understand that change is happening all over us. And a change on a global level eventually filters down to that individual level, doesn't it, at times? So that's kind of the exercise. So take some time to do that. And when you come ready, come back and we'll kind of look at a couple of thoughts that I've got just to flesh this out. So a couple of changes that we might be facing. Climate change, obviously a huge issue and topic globally, and that may well be having an effect further down the line. But no, not may well, it will be. But climate change is a big one. So, and then COVID. COVID has been a global issue. So, potentially you might have that in your suggestions there. On a national level, we might have the post-Brexit effect, the things that are going on since Brexit and all of that, the machinations and what have you. We might even have, and this is topical for now, so depending on when you're watching the video, it might be hopefully a distant memory, the fuel crisis. And I'm putting it in there because it depends on who we speak to and it depends on what's caused it, etc. But the fuel crisis, the perceived or real shortage of fuel at the petrol pumps, fuel for delivery wagons delivering food at supermarkets, that kind of thing. University, the changes is that it's actually the changes that affected them have leading them to change the ways of working. So that then means there's a knock-on effect for the entire university's universe, I guess, for want of a better phrase. So how is that potentially affecting? And then we come down to the team rules, because there might be safety rule changes. The COVID, the different ways of working leading to issues of how we work together. What are some of are we still looking at social distancing? How do we impact on that? What do we do about people coming in and out of buildings, events, that kind of thing? Turnover of members. So you might have changes with some team members, coming and going. And that's change in itself. It might not be on a global level, but it's a natural impact. And then you in your role, but also you as a student leader and student, you might be studying in different ways, which is putting demands on and demanding different things of you. And technology, we're having to use and embrace different technologies to deliver and to learn and to receive things. So they're just a few thoughts anyway, just to get us going. Okay, so the key thing here is to recognise that it is a universal phenomenon, change, and that a change on a global level can inevitably filter down to you and your team. And it's that there is so many changes. If we talk about a turn of a cog up here, can lead to a massive turn of a cog down here. So we're talking about the changes that can be pretty significant for you and your team in that team environment. So I guess what we're talking about here is what kind of world are we operating in? And there's a phrase that you may have come across, VUCA, and it's used in change management to illustrate that the difference, if you like, between what is classed as the old and the new, I guess. Now, for many of you, you might find that you've only really ever operated in the new. For me, and I'm 51 at time of recording. I'm 51, and I think as I joined the police in 1992, I probably hit the ground running as the old was making way to the new then, and it's only just got faster and faster in terms of change. But I'll kind of say that the old way was the way that predominantly, 50, 70 years ago, etc., things were more stable in terms of work. I'm not talking about factoring in things like world wars and things like that, but just generally the patterns of life, the ways of working were more stable, certain. If you got a job, you were doing that job, that's what you were for life. Simple. Not necessarily easy, but simple in the sense of I'm clear what I need to do. It's simple. Life is simple. It's smaller. It's more community based. That kind of thing. And clear. I know who I am, what my role is. Now, for some, that would lead to a sense of feeling like comfortable. I know where I'm at. For others, it might be quite frustrating and restraining. But the difference now is that we're operating in a world that is very volatile, fast changing, and because of that, things are very volatile. There are lots of unintended consequences by making one change or one implementation, one policy change here, there, and everywhere. With that comes uncertainty, complexity. There are so many moving parts because the world has opened up. We're no longer small communities. We are connected in so many different ways and therefore influenced by it. It's a very complex world. And with that, we can get a lot of ambiguity. There isn't always a right way, a simple one way to do it. We might need to be comfortable with ambiguity and navigate through shifting and changing and learn to be comfortable with that. And that's hard, or can be for many of us. So as I say, the old can be comfort, the new can represent discomfort for many. Some of us might thrive on change. That's fair, but that's difficult. It's different for different people. But for many, especially those who might have transitioned from the old to the new, that can be a real challenge for them. So I guess consider how you feel when you experience change. Let's take 60 seconds out. Do you thrive on it, or does it make you feel uncomfortable? How does it make you feel? Take 60 seconds to have a think about that. And I guess having thought about that, I get this quote is I like it as a really good quote to kind of highlight the truth of change, but also what can be really overlooked. The hard stuff is the easy stuff. And what we mean by that is that the hard stuff, like, if we're going to make a change, how many seats do we need? How many computers do we need? What room do we need? Where do we need it? And all the logistical, hard, tangible stuff, that's actually the easy stuff. It gives you something to do. It's task oriented. It's work, but it's easier. The soft stuff is the harder stuff, the emotions that helping people come with you on the journey. That's where it's really challenging. For some of the reasons you may have identified in the previous exercise, but you also may recognise that in your family, friends, colleagues, fellow students, and the people within your association or club. So I guess bringing on that question, how well do you know your team members and their level of comfort with change and uncertainty? Because that's an important one, isn't it? To recognise that we're not all the same. And how well do you actually know that? If they're different, do you know how different, how they respond, how they feel about it? So take 60 seconds out to have a look at that. Okay, so what I want to do is kind of explore this a little bit and kind of explore what we experience during change. And this is the Bridges transitions model. And Bridges talks about three stages of change and how we can navigate, ideally navigate through these when we go through change, but how we can sometimes get stuck. And what Bridges says initially is that in every change, there always has to be an ending. And what he means by that is that in order to move into something new, a change, something else has to finish or end. So I'll take the simple example of moving house. You know, if I'm moving house, then I am going to have to leave the house I'm in to move to a new house. So I'm going to have to end my living in this house to move to that house. Obvious. That's a tangible thing because it might be a fixed date. You know, on this date I'm moving. There's a tangible ending. That's the hard stuff. That's the tangible date stuff. But what about the soft stuff? Because in moving physically, I may still have some emotional stuff around this, mightn't I? I'm leaving a house that perhaps I've grown up in, my family have grown up, kids have grown up, I'm really attached to. So yes, I'm wanting to move to this house. I might not want to move to this, I might have to move to this house for other reasons. So there's obviously that. But I've still got an emotional sense that's left behind. So I might have physically ended it, but emotionally I'm still in the ending process, or I'm not even ready to end it. And that's important because this journey is not just tangible, physical, it's emotional. Then we can move on into the middle phase, which Bridges calls the muddle in the middle, the in between. And that's that phase where we start to adapt, we get used to, we try to find our feet, get ground, see what works, what doesn't work, and we start to settle into that, to try and experiment, to play, to make the job our own if it's a new job, or perhaps adapt to the new rules and just find our feet in that respect. So again, that's that place where we need to get to start to adapt to before we start to really get to what is the final bit, the new beginning. And this is tangibly, you could argue, if me moving house on a particular day, I've ended it, the middle is the moving, the ending is once I'm in the new beginning is in the, once I'm in the house. But emotionally, I could spend a few months in the new house, getting used to not living in my old house, missing it and what have you, getting used to where the local shops are, the muddle in the middle, finding my feet, where do I take the dog for a walk, that kind of thing, and actually starting to settle in and feel like it's my home, the new beginning. So if we apply that to change as it applies to you, perhaps in your own personal journey, student life, student leadership life, but within your team as well, what changes have been occurring, are occurring, or are likely to occur, and where are you and your people at this stages? Because you may have a change that's just happened and you're all tangibly in the new beginning, but emotionally, where are you and where are they? Because that emotional journey is an individual thing. So that gives us the question. And this is where I want you to take some time to think. What could you do to support your team through these stages? What are some ideas? So pause it, take some time to think what would help somebody end satisfactorily and move emotionally to start experimenting and moving along to get themselves ready for that new beginning. I'll give you a minute, and if you want, feel free to pause for longer. I'm sure you've hopefully got a few thoughts, but a couple of suggestions. One is, in terms of the ending, is to acknowledge it. Don't dismiss, minimize, or pretend it's not happening, because obviously it is important, but acknowledge the importance and significance of that ending. That's really important, not to brush it off and think, oh, well, we're ready to move on to the new. Empathize with the feelings. If somebody is struggling with just letting go or adapting and moving on, then empathy is not about them allowing them to wallow in it. It's allowing them to just acknowledge this is genuine, this is natural, this is what, whenever we're letting go, there is that emotional process, obviously. So I can see I see that this is important to you, I can see that you're upset about it, that's okay. The other thing is, don't denigrate the past or what is soon to be the past, because what I've found, and this is often in organisations, and you may find that depending on the culture within your association, etc., that there is a tendency to praise the new and think the past was wrong. Now, the past was a new at some point. The past was a new beginning. The ending was a new beginning at some point. So what we need to recognise is it was the right thing for that time. It may not have been perfect, but nothing is. Things will always be changing. So let's not denigrate it. If somebody's put a lot of work, a lot of heart and soul into it, or they've become very attached to certain ways and traditions, let's not denigrate that. Let's acknowledge that that was okay for that time. That's the way it was. Let's acknowledge. And then even think about having a celebration, a closure. Bit of a sort of a dour subject, but if you think about some funerals, there'll be a wake or a celebration in some respects, a memory or a remembering of that, and part of that has to give us emotional closure. Now, if we think about that in terms of leaving something behind, somebody leaving work is a classic. Saying goodbyes, those kind of rituals and routines are really important. So what could we do to celebrate that moving on, to let people kind of acknowledge it was what it was great, I enjoyed it, time to move on. In the in-between, we need to start to encourage exploration. And that is coupled with saying it's okay to make mistakes. We'll try things out, we'll have a go. Let's have some interim procedures that get us through, but let's experiment, let's come up with some ideas, and let's encourage that so people start to own it and don't feel like it's imposed on them totally. Because in owning it, in exploring, they can start to get the buy-in, find comfortable, and move to the new beginning. And as they move to the new beginning, perhaps as a leader, what we need to do is recognise that that new beginning will be an ending at some point. So how do we prepare for that? Not necessarily in kind of having the sword of Damocles over them, but just encourage them. It may change, things will change. Let's enjoy it while we can. Let's make the most of it. That kind of thing. That can be really useful. Okay, I'm talking about now safe uncertainty, because as we talked about there, the impact on the human being that you are and your team members are. The impact on you as a human being is that we're all different, but there's an emotional element to this. And change can be unsettling. Change can be exciting for some, or depending on the context, for many of us, and depending on what it is. But change can also be very unsettling, scary, stressful, worrying, all sorts of things. So how do we manage and support our team through uncertain times? And I want to introduce the concept of safe uncertainty. I'm going to do this by way of a matrix with two axes here. And we've got the two. One is the certain v uncertain kind of axis. And what we're talking about here is the fact that we've got a continuum between certainty and uncertain. And I'll illustrate it like this way. At this moment, for the next couple of minutes, I'm guessing you could be pretty certain, not 100% because we can't be 100% about anything, you can be pretty certain what you will be doing. Chances are watching this video, doing some of the exercises. You're reasonably, if not pretty certain. But extend the time out to tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. You have an idea. But as the time expands, your level of certainty that it will play out that way drops off, because there are a lot more factors that come into play in the unknown future. And that's the continuum that we as a manager, as a leader, are operating on. So that's one dimension. The other is feeling psychologically safe versus feeling unsafe. And we will explore what we mean by that. But if we think about it, it's where do you focus your effort, your attention as a manager in supporting your people? Now, I would suggest that we are trying to avoid the unsafe area, because we're going to explore psychological safety, important to do, but that psychologically unsafe area is not where we want to put any attention if we can. We have that safe and certain aspect of it. I'm going to come on to an exercise shortly to help you tease this out. But on the whole, investing too much of our energy in creating certainty in an unsafe way, safe, but on the whole, creating certainty with psychological safety could be a bit like running, but creating certainty in an uncertain world could lead us to creating artificial certainty. There are things we can't be certain about, but focusing a lot of our attention there may be misguided and a misdirection of our energy. What we actually are really worthwhile focusing on is that area of safe uncertainty. How can we help foster psychological safety so that people can navigate and manage and thrive during the uncertain times, during the changing times? Really, really useful and important to think about. So how can we support that? And this is where I want to bring in this idea of certain v uncertain. If we're talking about safe uncertainty, and this is why I've coloured them amber and green, and accordingly given you the size of blocks as to how you would allot your leadership attention. There are some things you can be certain of, I'm guessing, as a leader. So what can you be certain of? And I want you to take the time to think about that. What are the things that you can be certain of within your role as leader, within the functions and work of your team? What are the things you can be certain of? Take a moment and consider what aspects of your team remain relatively unchanged. Take 60 seconds and we'll come back and we'll look at some areas that might be useful for you. So hopefully you've had a few things, but what I want to give you is a few suggestions here. And these may not be applicable to you. It's about recognizing that these are just prompts to get you thinking. But you may be able to be certain that role expectations will remain the same. Perhaps, they may not, but perhaps your role, and the role of some of your team members, if not all of them, is the same. How they do what they do may change, but what is expected of them is not, perhaps. What about the function or the service you provide? Has that changed, or is that relatively consistent and staying the same? Again, how you deliver it, what it looks like might differ, so there might be nuance in this, but is essentially the service the same, or the function you provide, or the cause that you serve? Because that, again, is useful to acknowledge and identify. Are there specific tasks? So a lot might be changed, but there might be specific things within the realm of tasks that everybody does that remains the same. Again, acknowledging those can be useful. Here's some classics that I think, irrespective of the change, there are things that perhaps we should agree will not change, or wherever possible we will strive to live up to. Because again, this is a level of certainty that we can try to create within that. How you behave towards one another. No matter what you do in terms of the function or service provision, what changes, what doesn't, let's agree, potentially you can have this conversation with your team, how we treat each other. What are our shared values, and what is the team purpose overall? What is the team seeking to support, and what is their function? Those things may not change, and there may be an opportunity to clarify them, particularly within the context of the university's respect guidelines, behavioural expectations. It may be worth revisiting that. And as a manager, when you're trying to manage safe uncertainty, being clear about what is certain, remains unchanged, what you can say is the same, can be reassuring. It means that actually, right, we know that that's the same. I'm not going to have to worry about that. I'll focus my attention on this. So in my head, I've got less things that I can worry about or be concerned about, because I know they're okay. I've got them. I know what I'm doing with them. Behaviour is a great one to get people together to agree that shared values and behaviour. So if we look at the other side of it, though, we can look at what we can be certain of, but if we're looking at uncertain, it becomes a little bit more difficult to say, well, what can I do? What we're talking about is how can you support during uncertain times? What can you do as a manager? That means how can you show up as a manager to support your team during uncertainty? So we're not talking about creating artificial certainty here. We're talking about the behaviours, the things that you can do that can really help that. So again, 60-second challenge. Feel free to pause for longer if you wish, but what do you think you can do to influence your team's feelings of safety during uncertainty? And we're going to explore this, but I just want your initial thoughts. How can you support that sense of this is a good place to work, safe place to work, I can contribute, I can do what I need to do, and I'm okay to say I'm struggling, etc. if I need to do that. So, safe uncertainty, just some suggestions. How you can support during those uncertain times. Well, consistency. Now, this might sound a bit counter when we've got a lot of change. What we're talking about is consistency in your behaviour. It's easy for us as human beings that we are, and you, even as a leader, you are a human being. You can have good days and bad days. You'll have moments where you feel like blowing your top, where you're irritable, etc. And, permission to be human, we all have those times. But as a leader, it's about recognizing that consistency in your behavior is important to display and to behave towards your people, your team. So that, I guess, in effect, whilst they want to see the human being there, they also don't want to feel like you're unpredictable. I don't know what mood they're coming in today. I don't want to feel like I'm walking around on eggshells around them, that kind of thing. So consistency. And have a think about these. How could you demonstrate consistency in your behaviour? Because it's easy to say, well, I'll be consistent with my behaviour. What does that actually mean? How could you demonstrate and show up in that in your day-to-day interactions? Inclusivity. And again, what we're talking about this is on a whole kind of level basis in terms of all, different diversity, gender, all of those areas, cognitive diversity. We want to be inclusive, but also including people we might not like. There might be people that you like more than somebody else. And as a leader, what we need to recognize is that we need to encourage inclusivity, even if it's somebody that perhaps we wouldn't normally spend time with, that kind of thing. So how would you show up? How would you demonstrate that? Transparency. Now, what we mean by transparency is being, I guess, showing up and doing what you say you're going to do, being true to your word, being open and honest, being honest about what you can't reveal, because there may be things that you know that you can't reveal to members of your team, but not being devious about that is important. So being transparent. Look, there are things that I can't discuss at the moment. I will share with you as soon as you can. You've just got to trust me on that, and building that kind of that transparency around it. And when you say one thing to one person, we're saying it consistently to everybody else. We're not going to betray confidence within that, but it's about developing that sense of, they are what they say they are. And then we come to things like respect, visibility and integrity. So how would you demonstrate these things? Respecting each other, respecting your colleagues, expecting respect back. Demonstrating visibility as a leader is important too. It's not always about being always there, always approachable, but it is about being visible, being present when things are going on, perhaps when the stress is on or an event's happening or something, that you are present and you are there and approachable and available. And integrity, I guess that goes back to a bit of the transparency, is being who you say you are, following on your word, good to your word, or if you can't fulfill a commitment, you're up in front. I can't manage that. A great deadline, I'm not able to manage that. That integrity leads you to admit mistakes or to be honest about it. So I guess the question is, how could you, in some behaviours, demonstrate that? Because the behaviours that you demonstrate as a leader can have a ripple effect out on the team, and during uncertain times can have a real positive impact. I always remember, just as a little aside, as a police officer, I remember being a young policey going to a road traffic accident and just it being utter chaos and feeling like I had to organise it. And being inexperienced, my sergeant turned up. And I remember when my sergeant turned up, stepped out of the vehicle, calmly put his hat on, just that consistent behaviour, just slowly strode up, calmly surveyed, and he had this ripple effect on me, on my colleagues, on other members of the public, and the confidence raising it gave us as he directed was just incredible. So, that's obviously one example, but how can you, with your behaviour, demonstrate these things in a calm, consistent way that helps people feel, we're okay here. Even though things might be high pressure, I'm not sure what I'm doing, I'm not sure where things are going, but we're okay. I'm okay to say I'm not okay. Which brings me on to psychological safety, and what is it, and why does it matter? So we're going to explore that as well. So psychological safety, and this is a quote from Timothy Clark, who wrote the book 4 Stages of Psychological Safety, and I like it because we're going to explore the model that he gives. It's a condition in which you feel included, baseline, safe to learn, to contribute, and to challenge the status quo. Now what Timothy did through his research is he developed a model, and I'm going to display the model and kind of explain it as we go. But he developed 2 axes, and the axes are respect and permission. So in terms of this, what he talks about here is respect axis is about from low to high. So it's about how the respect we have for our people, for who they are, not just what they bring to the table, for them as a person. It's the general respect we have as a human being to another, to value them. So that can go from low to high. And permission is talking about, if I'm a member of the team, how comfortable do I feel in doing something, getting on doing, taking ownership, taking initiative, asking, saying, struggling, seeking help. Do I feel as if it's a permissive environment for that? So higher, or somewhere where I'm going to get closed down, dismissed, shut off, and therefore it's low. So that permission versus respect is what leads us to the 4 stages that Timothy talks about. Outside of that is exclusion. So that's the base. That's where you're not part of the team. Now this can happen physically because you've got people who are inevitably not part of your team, and that's fine. Now we're not talking about exclusionary behaviour and treating them less respectfully. We're not talking about that. We're talking about there are people who are just not part of your team. But there are potentially people who may be in your team who don't feel included, who feel excluded for whatever reason. So that's worth thinking about, because they may be in the team, but because respect for them is low, or their perceived respect, their permission is low, they feel excluded. Which brings us to the first stage, which is inclusion safety. And if you think about it, this is the bottom line, the basic. This is the threshold. This is where members of your team all feel part of the team. They feel welcomed in, and not just welcomed in on the first day they join the team, but it's an ongoing welcome. They know that they're part of something, and they're not feeling like they can turn up one day and there's a bit of an atmosphere and the cold shoulder or whatever. We all feel part of it, because respect for us is high enough on the basis of us being part of the team and know that I'm part of that. But that's the minimum, isn't it? That's the bare minimum. So what we're talking about is how do we move up to this? And what Timothy Clark shows is as we move up, team performance moves up and improves. Our engagement and our level of innovation, etc., moves up, as we shall see. But the second stage is learner safety. And what we're talking about here is that as I start to feel comfortable within the team, I feel comfortable enough to be able to say, I'm not sure what I'm doing here, I'm struggling on this, could somebody help me? Do you know how to do it? Could I have a bit of a help here? And we are feeling safe to learn, to ask questions, to bother colleagues and ask them for a little bit of help and a little bit of guidance. That learner safety is where we start to feel like we can start to really get to grips with what our role is, to develop our skills and confidence levels. And if we move on then, we're moving into contributor safety. Really, it's that place where I'm effective, I'm doing my job, I feel like I'm respected, I've got the permission to just get on and do, I've got the skills and the knowledge, I've been through the learner safety stage, and I am part of the team and performing. I might slip down if there's a new skill or something changes that leads me to ask questions, but I'm in that zone where I can move backwards and forwards. Now what Timothy has identified in his research is that the level 4, the stage 4 if you like, is that challenger safety. And this is where we can really open up a highly high performing team. And that challenger safety is where your team members, including you, all feel good and effective enough to be able to challenge the status quo, processes, the way things are, decisions. Challenge respectfully. We're not talking about sniping and undermining. We're talking about saying, I think it's a better way to do that. And everybody being up for listening and hearing that out and following it and generating that. And that's where innovation happens. And that's where teams really move into the next level. Now, you may, depending on where you're at with your team and the roles, you may not see that, you may be on different stages here and interested in where you move to in respect of where you are. But it's important to recognise that when we talk about psychological safety, we're trying to get that onward trajectory. We don't want to be slipping back down wherever possible, do we? So I guess, just a couple of other things really, for this model, just to understand before we move into a question for you. If we tip the scale one way or the other, whether in too much respect but low permission or too much permission and low respect, we get problems. So on the respect side, you might have high respect, within the team, or you as a leader, highly respect your team, but they don't have a lot of permission to just get on and do. And that's kind of the helicopter parent idea, or the helicopter manager. You're fixing all their problems. You're kind of being the one that everybody comes to. You're not really encouraging them to think for themselves, that own their own challenges and issues, or come up with their own ideas. You're micromanaging in that sense. So you might respect them highly, but we're not allowing them a lot of space. That is a stilting, stunted way to manage. The other side is low respect, but high permission. So we're kind of expecting them to just get on and do, but the people in our team don't feel as if they've got the respect there to be, or feel valued enough for themselves. They feel more valued, their contribution may or may not be valued, but they don't feel valued as a person. And what can happen there is people don't feel able to ask, to challenge, to just get on. They need to check in, they need to do, and maybe don't feel motivated to do anything. Well, why should they? Until they're told. Because nobody respects me. I'll just do the basics, if at all, anything. Might even feel excluded. So we need to recognise that we don't need to tip the balance either way. So I guess really what we're thinking about here is, where are you as a team on that 4 stages, and where is each team member? Because the thing is, this can be a whole team phenomenon, but also each team member may be at different stages, depending on the level of experience in the team, perhaps some interactions that are bit friction between two people that have thrown one of them further down to feel excluded. Have a think about that. How could you, if you've identified, the group is on stage 2, for example, or maybe an individual is on group's on 3, but you've got an individual at 1. How could you foster psychological safety as a team as a whole and address those individual needs? What are some of the tactics? So I'll give you 60 seconds, pause again if you need for longer to think about that. Hopefully you've identified some approaches, and we've talked about a lot of different tactics and tools in the kit and approaches. What it comes down to, if we want to simplify this down, because there is a lot to think about here, is that you are operating as a leader in a highly changeable world. Be certain about what you can be and communicate that with your team. You know what? There's a lot happening, but your role's not changing, or what I expect from you is, or we'll agree we'll treat each other well. So if we have a problem, if something changes, let's agree that we will do this. So we set some ground rules. That can be a cracking, effective way to develop that sense of cohesion and comfort in some areas. And then look at, well, how do we support the uncertainty? And again, I'm going to boil this down. As a manager, we've looked at the 4 stages of psychological safety. We've looked at the behaviours to think about. A lot of this comes down to some key behaviours as a manager. It's about treating all your people, including yourself, with respect, showing up consistently, being open and available, and listening and having time for your people. And this is where, rather than give you specifics, it's about revisiting some of those tips, but then looking at some of the other modules, because that's where you will really put the tactics and the tools in the kit for this. Listening, some effective time management, some conflict resolution and mediation that is respectful and negotiation based, and not overbearing as a leader. So overall, think about how you can show up more consistently, more fairly, be more open, be more communicative, and make that two-way so that your people know that they can listen and hear you, but that they will be listened and heard, and that you will genuinely process that. So overall, there's some of the tips and takeaways for you. Hopefully that's been useful. If you use the workbook to download, you can explore some of the activities again and pick up some of those thoughts and tools. But what we've covered, we've looked at taking stock of the changes we're facing, and we've looked at understanding how change affects us. We've looked at your role as a leader, and we've looked at how we create a psychologically safe environment, and how do we support other people through that change. Okay, so what now? Right, well, first thing to consider is how adaptable are you to change? Because that's the first thing to start working on, is how do you get yourself in a sense of psychological safety for yourself and start to develop that sense of flexibility. What about your team, and how flexible and adaptable are they? And what 3 things can you do that could help you and your team feel more psychologically safe and feel more capable of operating during uncertainty? A really important aspect of that. And then download the PDF, do the exercises if you haven't already, revisit that, complete the post-session activities, and consider attending the Q&A sessions as well, in person or online. But for now, take care. I hope that's been useful. Check out the other resources and the 5-minute bite size if you haven't, and the other self-teach videos. Good luck for now. Take care.